Most welcome to 1028 of the Heidegger series. Today we will talk about the voice of the friend. And let me make a short recap of the previous two readings. Adding takes away. It's like adding a face, body, name. Second, specification or specifications, takes away. Singularity can only point to singularity if plurality not is excluded. This is very important. Exclusion of plurality cannot show singularity. Exclusion takes away. For instance, it is not the voice of an enemy. Let me help with an explanation of singularity. I know that is to stir some confoundment. A singularity that can tell about singularity needs to be inclusive, needs to be big and forceful. More complexity is possible if plurality is included. That makes for a more powerful singularity. That's a helper. I have an even better helper, and I will try to get back to that at the end of the lecture. Really hope I remember that. But as a starter, singularity can only point to singularity if plurality is not excluded. And helper, that is because singularity plus plurality makes for more foundation. Little bit like if you want to make a jump, use your both legs. It is the jump that is important, not which leg you jump with. It's the why that is important. Okay, there will be an added explanation or my point of view after I read Why from the Voice of the Friend. Okay, let's continue. We took off page 173 last, and I'm going to start a little bit earlier here. First paragraph on 173, Heidegger's ear. Philopolemology. I think that is a conjunct of philo, meaning friend, and polemo, meaning war. The difference between animal and Dasein passes there again through the possibility of the as such, als, and of understanding or comprehending, entendre, verstehen. Elsewhere, I have tried to problematize Heidegger's analysis in this place. I shall underscore and generalize here only this remark: whether a matter of the hand, of feet, eye, sex, or ear, the Heideggerian phenomenology of Dasein's body, in what is more original and more necessary, in that phenomenology supposes precisely the phenomenological as such, or the phenomenological as such. The last as such is in citation mark. The structural difference between Dasein and non-Dasein, for example, the animal, is the difference between a being open to the as such and a being that is not, and therefore is Weltarm, world poor. It's just brilliant. In one stroke, du coup, the voice of the friend, and consequently friendship in general, gives itself to be heard and understood, entendre, only in the phenomenological space of the as such. No friendship outside a world in which verstehen and phenomenology are possible. And the animal, if something like that existed that had some unity, will have no ear capable of hearing. Nevertheless, third, the very moment he confirms this Aristotelian philosopheme, Heidegger clearly intends to return to a pre-Aristotelian, indeed pre-Platonic hearing of logos. That is to say, to an experience of Phylen, more originary than that of the Platonico-Aristotelian philia. What does this claim signify? Up to what point is it sustained? It is surprising, yet all the more significant, that Heidegger often speaks of Phylen, but practically never names philia, and when, for example, in the seminar of 1943 to 44 of Heraclitus, he does so translating philia by Gunst. Plato and Aristotle, the great philosophers of philia, will not even be evoked. Neither friendship nor philia are expressively named, it seemed to me, in Sein und Zeit, in particular in the little phrase around which we are circling. Heidegger does not speak of friendship, of the concept or the general essence of friendship, but of the friend, of someone, of a Dasein in a singular, whose voice alone, citation or rather parenthesis, a partial object, perhaps a psychoanalyst would say, opens in a way the hearing of Dasein. Why and how does it open Dasein? No doubt because a voice of the other itself, is carried by every Dasein thus by sich, not in it, nor outside it, but by sich. The order of the existential analytic here is the following: no discourse, Rede, without hearing, understanding in the sense first of comprehension, verstehen, Verständlichkeit, no understanding, agreement, or verstehen without hearing, hören. Hearing is constitutive of discourse, but does not consist in an acoustic phenomenon of psychological order. Hearing has no need of the inner or the outer ear in the organic sense of the term. Hearing is the primary authentic opening of Dasein for its own most potentiality for being. Das Hören konstituiert sogar die primäre und eigentliche Offenheit des Daseins für sein eigenstes Sein können. What the ear is, the essence and the destination of Dasein's ear, will be understood starting from this hören, and not the inverse. And Heidegger names the hearing of the voice of the friend in the same phrase, in order to make explicit this opening of Dasein to its most authentic potentiality for being. If hearing the friend's voice constitutes Dasein's opening to its own most potentiality for being, that means there is no Dasein without it, no properness, indeed no self-proximity of Dasein without this bei sich tragen, of the different other, of the other different as friend, but of the other. Dasein has an ear and can hear then only insofar as Dasein carries by sich, the friend, the voice of the friend. No ear without friend, no friend without ear. Dasein's opening to its own most potentiality for being, as hearing the voice of the other as friend, is absolutely originary. This opening does not come under as psychology, as sociology, and anthropology, and ethics, or politics, etc. The voice of the other friend, of the other as friend, the ear that I prick up to it, is the condition of my own proper being. But this voice nevertheless defines the figure of an originary sharing and an originary belonging, of a Mitteilen, or of everything that is, as Heidegger says in this passage, shared with the other in the Mit-sign of discourse, of address and response. Shared commune belonging, indifference is immediately inscribed like a kind of originary socius in what passes through the ear from hören, hearing, to Hörigkeit as obedient listening. The other friend, the other as friend, being there already, its voice at least already having sounded, as if it dictated a kind of law, the movement, voice at least already have sounded, as if it dictated a kind of law, the movement, voice at least as already have sounded, movement, Let me reread that. As if dictated a kind of law, the movement Dasein comes to its own potentiality for being, sorry there, and to Gehörigkeit, to belonging. Dasein comes to its own potentiality for being. There would not be any properness, any proper potentiality for being of Dasein without this voice of the other friend, yet so difficult to situate in the topology of its comportment, so to speak, in what it carries with it, in it, outside it, in its bei sich tragen, that is, in or with a certain air for which the distinction between inside and outside is so unheimlich. Dasein hears, hört, because it can comprehend or hear, entendre, in the sense of understanding, verstehen, as understanding being in the world, in der Welt sein, with the other, mit den anderen. Dasein listens to, hörig, a word that Heidegger leaves between quotation marks to underscore the ploy from hearing, listening as hören, to listening to as obedience, indeed submission or subjection. And in this obedient listening, Hörigkeit, there is indeed Dasein's belonging. Dasein is from then on zugehörig, belongs already to what could be called the belonging or sharing of the community. Als Verstehendes in der Welt sein mit den anderen ist es dem Mitdasein und ihm selbst hörig und in dieser Hörigkeit zugehörig. As understanding being in the world with the other, it, Dasein, is attentively or obediently listening to Mitdaseins and itself. And in this obedient listening it belongs, or it is partner, it participates or shares. But what I am anxious to insist on, before provisionally leaving this inexhaustible paragraph, is that this singular friend that every Dasein carries and hears, bei sich, no more represent friendship in general than it is necessary friendly. The voice is not friendly, first because it is the voice of the friend, of someone, of another Dasein responding to the question, who? What defines the voice of the friend, then, is not a quality, the friendly characteristics, but a belonging. But because this voice is not necessarily friendly, one ought not to conclude for all that the voice of this friend is neuter or neutral. Why? The voice of the friend is not reduced to the phoneme or to the acoustic phenomenon, does not merge with a noise perceived by an animal ear or auditory organ. This voice is essentially understandable voice, the possibility of speech or discourse. It is essentially marked, like everything found at the opening of Dasein, by a certain Stimmung and by Befindlichkeit. It has then a tonality or modality that one would call, in a language not very Heideggerian, affective. But here this voice says nothing determined. Heidegger lends it no remark, nor as voice is it regarding essentials a kind of witness, that eye of conscience that accompanies, keeps watch over and oversees, if at least the perspective, visual and cognitive, indeed theoretical connotation of attestation or testament is valued. But if it is not an eye of conscience, it is not either the inner voice of conscience, for this voice is not interior. One would not be able to pose on this subject question of critical or deconstructive type that recourse to the monologue or to the purely inner voice of the ego in Husserl's logical investigations could call for. Here there is no phenomenon of ideal self-presence in the inner voice. It is really a matter of the voice of the other. One of the most difficult questions in deciphering this paragraph is a question that can just as well be qualified as logical, rhetorical, philological, indeed poetic. And it concerns the status of this allusion to the voice of the friend in the demonstrative chain of the paragraph, and finally step by step in the chain of the chapter and the book. A philological or poetic question, if the voice of the friend is only one example among others, of the by sich tragen, of the other by every Dasein, is there behind this example a kind of more or less poetic topos, a quasi-citation, question mark. Even if, as is unfortunately my case for the moment, I cannot recognize the literal detail of every determined citation, one can always think of a topos rather than current, not only in the everyday language, but in numerous literatures that will have, under one form and another, named a voice of the friend. Even if there is no hidden citation, in the strictest sense of the word citation, Heidegger doubtless makes at least a kind of virtual reference to current expressions. The voice of the friend, the by sich tragen, recurrent expressions, allusions to a topos, but justly to underscore the enigmatic and necessary character of the topos, of the place to which the topos refers, to wit, a voice that is situated neither inside nor out of Dasein, neither near nor far, a voice that participates, as it were, in the opening of the Da of the Dasein, and that takes this exemplary form of a voice in the very absence of the voice carrier. This responds to the question that I even called for, of wanting anything better, philological or poetic, leaves it unsolved and even relaunches the question of the exemplarity of this example. Why would the voice of the friend be a better example of this situation, of this topology of Dasein? Question mark. One definitely understands the necessity to take up the example of a voice of the other in the chapter entitled Dasein und Rede, die Sprache. But why a voice of the friend? Why not the enemy, the lover, the father, the mother, the brother, or the sister, the son or the daughter, or so many other figures still, all also speaking? Everything happens if the friend were not one figure among others, and therefore could play an exemplary role for being the figureless, le sans figure, or, as is said in French, le figurant, or similarly in English, the figurehead, that individual being no one can be anyone, the exemplary, then at once singular and general. Configuration of every possible other, of every possible figure, or rather of every possible voice of the other. Every voice of the other is in some way the voice of the friend, figured by the voice of the friend for Dasein. For Dasein alone can and must have a friend that speaks. Dasein alone has an ear for the friend that speaks. Here is imposed on me a logico-rhetorical dimension of the same question. The question of exemplarity. After the evocation of the friend, when Heidegger speaks of Aufeinanderhören, of listening to one another in general, has the friend been only one example among others? And then, why this example rather than another, or than the contrary example? Or else does Heidegger also speak of the other as the voice of the friend, such that the exemplarity functions here in another sense, not in the sense of the example among other possible examples, but of the exemplarity that gives to be read and carries itself all the figures of Mitdasein as Aufeinanderhören. All the figures of Mitsein would be figures of the friend, even if they were secondarily unfriendly or indifferent. The internal structure... Va?
Det stänger 4, det är sommartid.
Aha, okej, jag visste inte. Sorry, I put a pause in here. So I had to relocate, and I'm now under the statue of Gustavus III. This apparently was a gift from an American citizen on July 4th, 1923. Why it's in here in Gothenburg, I don't know. Oh, it's a lovely statue. Let's push on. Let's see here. All the figures of Mitsein would be figures of the friend, even if they were secondarily unfriendly or indifferent. The internal structure of chainings in this short paragraph does not seem to me to permit by itself alone deciding between the two hypotheses. Rather, if I orient myself toward the second, that is because a larger context, the one I'm now going to try to recognize seems to indicate that for Heidegger, Feline, on the non-psychological, non-anthropological, non-ethico-political plane of the existential analytic, and above all of the question of being or thesis, welcome within itself, in its very accord, many other modes than that of friendliness, but as well opposition, tension, confrontation, rejection, indeed, as we will come to this, if not war, at least Kampf, polemos. And it seems reasonable to think that Heidegger still speaks of the other as the voice of the friend when, immediately after the evocation of that voice, he concludes his paragraph in this way: listening to one another, which constitutes Mitsein, has for possible forms following, folgen, accompanying, mitgehen, the negative modes of not hearing, das Nichthörens, of opposition, des Widersetzen, of defying, des Trotzen, of turning away, der Abkehr. In the hypothesis I'm going to follow, these negative modes could still determine the hearing of the voice of the friend. To be opposed to the friend, to turn away from it, to defy it, to not hear it, that is still to hear and keep it, to carry with self, bei sich tragen, the voice of the friend. Consequently, if one still goes no further than Sein und Zeit, then, so to speak, the premises of the course I would like to sketch, one can say that there is neither opposition nor contradiction between what is said of the voice of the friend as an exemplar of mit sein as aufeinander hören. Sorry about that. It is still the voice of the friend. It does not matter if it's an enemy, an unfriendly voice, or anything like that. It is still the voice of the friend. Consequently, if one still goes no further than Sein und Zeit, then, so to speak, the premises of the course I would like to sketch, one can say that there is neither opposition nor contradiction between what is said of the voice of the friend as exemplar of Mitsein as aufeinander hören, and what is said near the end of the book about struggle, combat, Kampf, as the essential form of miteinander sein, of community, Gemeinschaft, and of the people, Volk. That is because the voice of the friend does not exclude opposition, because it does not oppose itself to the oppositions, that there is no essential opposition between Vielen and Kampf, as will be said later, polemos, war. Before leaving Sein und Zeit, I would like to situate around the word Kampf not only a motif that does not at all contradict the evocation of the friend's voice as the opening of Dasein as Mitsein, but on the contrary, prolonging it, announces very precisely the thematization so insistent of struggle, Streit, polemos, and above all, Kampf, which once more makes explicit Dasein's own proper potentiality for being, would call for a long and meticulous reading. I retain it on one single trait. Compared to sharing or communication, Mitteilung, and on the same level, to the same degree, struggle. Kampf is how the power, Macht, of destiny, Geschickes, is set free. This destiny, Geschick, is here the Geschehen of Dasein as Mitgeschehen. The historiality of or as being with. The Geschehen, the historical event, so to speak, that of which historiality is made, to wit, Geschichtlichkeit, whose fundamental constitution Heidegger analyzes here, is common or shared historiality under the form of community, Gemeinschaft, and the folk, and the people, the folk. The common destiny of the community or the people sets free its power, Macht, in the sharing, the communication, Mitteilung, to be sure, but also both quite as originally in the struggle, Kampf. This power that is thus set free in the common or shared struggle is also superpower, Übermacht, namely the moment of finite freedom that assumes in the impact of the choice, Wahl, and the non-power, Ohnmacht, of the turning away or of the being turned away, Überlassenheit. The motif of choice, Wahl, is at once indissociable from that of resolution, of authenticity of resolution or decision, Eigentlichkeit, Entschlossenheit, but also of heritage, Erbe, Dasein as it throws itself by anticipation toward death, inherence, and chooses. The inherited possibility is at the same time chosen, aber gleichwohl gewollten Möglichkeit überliefert. All these possibilities, choice, tradition both inherited and chosen, authentic resolution also determined. In the same chapter as the projecting oneself toward one's own being guilty or being liable, being accountable, a project that keeps silent and is ready for anxiety. Das verschwiegene angstbereite sich entwerfen auf das eigene Schuldigsein. All that is at once historical because shared in the being together or with one another in Miteinander sein, but also shared in the struggle as struggle, Kampf. And so, just like the voice of the friend, Kampf belongs to the very structure of Dasein. It belongs to its historical structure, and thus this must also be explicitly stated to the subjectivity of the historical subject. For let us not forget what question announces section 74 on the fundamental constitution of historiality. Die Grundverfassung der Geschichtlichkeit, quote, to what extent and on the basis of what ontological conditions does historiality belong as an essential constitution? To the subjectivity of the historial subject, inwiefern und aufgrund welcher ontologischen Bedingungen gehört zur Subjektivität des geschichtlichen Subjekts die Geschichtlichkeit als Wesensverfassung. End of quote. This section resonates historically in both the most acute and serious way with what is announced or found in the Gestation in German and Europe from 1927 to 1933. This resonance is not necessarily a consonance or a correspondence and remains to be interpreted. But in any case, the discourse that is organized around Volk und Kampf in Sein und Zeit, but also above all in Rectorate discourse and in the introduction to metaphysics, is not all contradictory to the evocation of the friend's voice, some 220 pages earlier. Although to my knowledge, once again, those are the only two occurrences of the word Freund and the word Kampf in Sein und Zeit. No contradiction, no opposition, I was saying, and first being opposition itself, but also resistance, disobedience, insubordination are described as essentially possibilities of listening to one another, auf ein anderen hören, of faithful or docile hearing, Hörigkeit, and of belonging, Zugehörigkeit, in which remains exemplary the hearing of the voice of the friend that each Dasein bei sich trägt. If the voice of the friend, and then the reference to the friend, is as essential to Dasein's own proper being, qua Mitsein, as are the community, the people and the struggle, Kampf, is no doubt logical to conclude from this that there is no friend that is not itself Dasein, responding in return to the same description and the same conditions. No friend outside of the possibility of speaking, hearing, entering the Miteinander of Auseinandersetzung. No friend outside of belonging to a community and to people, Volk. It is not entirely excluded, nor is it certain, that belonging to the same community or the same people, the experience of the same tongue or the participation in the same struggle is the requisite condition for a voice of a friend to be carried by sich, by Dasein. That is not certain. No doubt it is excluded by the analysis of hearing, hören, and of the pricked up ear, horchen, that immediately follows the evocation of the friend's voice. To pick up the ear is not to hear auditory sensations and noises, sonorous complexes, acoustic phenomena that could give rise to psychology. No, we prick up our ear toward what is beyond the ear, the open ear, over there, in the world, beside what is, for example, usable in the world. Again, the expression by, this time underscored, beim Innerweltliche zu handen, or beside what is heard. We do not hear, hearing, but the heard, and then what is understood. Dasein is essentially what hears in understanding, that is, what is understood. Dasein is essentially what hears in understanding, that is being beside what is heard in the sense of understood, beim Verstanden. It is by this, by opening the ears opening, the opening of Dasein to its own proper potentiality for being, and the opening of the ear as Dasein's ear. It is by this, through the ear, that Dasein carries the voice of the friend by sich, but that it also carries itself beside things in the world, and first beside what is heard and understood, beim innerweltlichen Zuhanden or beim Verstanden. All the enigma of this topic of Dasein's here and of the Da of Sein passes through the semantics of the beim, of this beside, this auprès de, whose vicinity is neither the very close nor the infinitely distant. Heidegger gives some rather interesting example of what is heard and understood when we prick up our ear, and when from then on, beyond the acoustic phenomena and noise, we are beside what is outside us. These examples are of two orders. On the one hand, things that are in the world as innerweltlichen Zuhanden, and on the other hand, the discourse of the other. The first series associated modern techno-military themes: the creaking wagon, the knarrenden Wagen, the motorcycle, the marching column, die Kolonne auf dem Marsch, then again the motorcycle and still the wagon, the and non-technological but not less significant themes: the north wind, the crackling fire, the woodpecker tapping the tree. Concerning the discourse of the other, we are in advance with the other, that is to say, outside ourselves, beside the being, by dem Seienden, on what the discourse bears, even if we do not understand what the other says, even if the other speaks a foreign tongue, even if we hear unintelligible, unverständliche words. This unintelligibility, for example, that of a foreign tongue, does not prevent us from understanding that we are dealing with an intelligible language that bears on the beings beside which Dasein. Sorry about that. Does not prevent us from understanding that we are dealing with an intelligible language that bears on the beings beside which Dasein can stand. This remark permits one to think that the voice of the friend, whose originary and constitutive character we have analyzed, must doubtless speak a language long and belong to a folk. But through this voice, the tongue of a foreign people can be spoken. The friend can be a stranger, but like all Dasein, it belongs to a community and a people, is engaged in a history, a geschehen that is mitgeschehen, and in a struggle, like every voice, and thus like every ear, those of the friend. So, what do I say about this? Well, think about all these things as being zu handen, things that you use. They are tools for you. Zug. So the hearing of the voice, it's all good, in the meaning it's all benevolent and sufficient. And it's surprising when it's mentioned that the friend could be an enemy. But think about it deeper. The voice tells itself. The voice has it all. It is just the voice, but that is not just the voice. It's all. And it brings with it Dasein. Therein lies the being. And make it even more explained, especially the last thing is explainable in terms of understandability. We talk about a foreign tongue, the voice could be a foreign tongue, but we can still hear it. We can open our ears to it. And you say to yourself, how is that possible? It must be possible, because everything is contained there. Think about the word Geschichte in contrast to Historia. Geschichte has everything in itself. It's a Dasein, so to speak. And that is unmistakable when you hear it. It cannot be otherworldly, so to speak. The Geschichte is of this world. It's always thrown into the world. It has the reek of reality. And this is also, of course, in a way, questioning of the idea that the thoughts are perfect. So you can perfect your thoughts as much as you can, but the matter outside, the voice you hear, are of a completely different kind. No, they are all Dasein. They're not of a different kind. And this is an understanding that Heidegger wants to lead us to, that they are all Dasein. Thinking is not otherworldly. It doesn't have a completely different characteristics. It has the same complexities as anything you can hear. And the thoughts are also something you can listen into. And instead of seeing them or adding to them names, bodies, faces, whatever you add to a thought, look into it instead. Listen to it. Open up your ear. And don't think about that ear as being an inner ear. And I think that's where the problem starts. You think about an outer ear directed to the outside world. You think about an inner ear listening to our own thoughts. They are all adding unnecessary things. I can make a pointer to Julian Jaynes, the bicameral mind, when the voice was not distinctive as being from the inside or the outside. And this is actually the case in many cultures even today. And that works fantastic, actually works much better. It's a voice still, and you open your ear, you prick your ear to listening to that voice. And listening deep is what it's about. Not determine it, not giving it a face, definition, not ever, never say it's a friend and thereby it's a non-enemy. Then you have closed off your ears. Then you no longer hear. Then you shut out yourself from reality. Because what Heidegger is pointing to, you might be thinking to yourself, why this complexity? Well, it's about the world. Isn't it obvious? The world is complex. It's not a piece of literature only, it's about the world. It's about the Dasein, to understand that. And here we can use the helping tool of affordances, and this is the simplest tool I would present so far. To see as affordance, then we don't term them, we don't define them in the same way. We definitely don't talk about inner hearing or an outer hearing. see thoughts and things as affordances. What fits the purpose, so to speak? Where is the why? The why always bring Dasein, because that is Sein und Zeit. It's about why. Warum? Not about what, where, how. No, it's about why. Listening into the voice will answer the question of why, not the question of what, because what obscures, to take a coarser view of explaining, you could say from a point of view of affordances, the what obscures understanding. It shuts your ear, both your inner ear and your outer ear, and it opens up to misunderstandings, so to speak. The thinking that thoughts are much more simpler than the world for some reason, and they're much more perfected, and they should not contain polemos, aggression, war, pain, hurt. And then you already left the world, and you become locked in the idea that you're not Einwurf, you're not of this world, you are otherworldly. And that is the same thing as just not paying attention. Listen here now. That's the same thing as not paying attention. Lock in your inner ear and your outer ear. And now all of a sudden, thanks to Heidegger, we got a much better explanation of what mind wandering is. It is shutting the ears, the inner ears and the outer ears, both at the same time, not listening in, or not seeing in, or not sensing in, or not proprioceptionally sensing, kinesthetically sensing. It's a reduction. It's walking around with these object eyes that are almost stinging people like daggers, with their intensity of wanting to find out what, where, how, and never having the docile, sanguine, comfort, relaxing why question. Because why question is in a way a no question. It's listening in, and everything is there. Everything you need. There is no absence there. It's the supplement that brings the idea of an absence. The need for the what question make our world poor. Weltarm. I really like that word of Heidegger. Weltarm. World poor. I think that should be the word of today. Weltarm. World poor. Inner, outer world doesn't matter. Or you can say, to put it in a Gibsonian, even the most simple form I would put today, that it's lacking of an understanding of affordances. You become clumsy with the material you have to your disposal, to handle in your head, to handle in the outer world, to handle with yourself. Don't be too weltarm. And I say thank you very much, and I wish you a very pleasant afternoon. Bye bye for now.